So, just took a few still photos of some of the chalk I've laid down on the sidewalk here this morning. It is Sunday, November 17th, 2013. I'm in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, and I'm protesting against a variety of Unitarian Universalist injustices and abuses, one of which is Unitarian Universalist clergy misconduct and UUA cover-up thereof. The chalk slogans that I've laid down here this morning deal with the fact that the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations had the unmitigated gall to accuse me of the crime of blasphemous libel for allegedly making unfounded and vicious allegations to the effect that ministers of the association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. Exact quote from the cease and desist demand letter that I was served with last June. And by that I mean June of 2012, not June of 2013. So yes, basically, good day. The Unitarian Universalist Association hired Stikeman Elliott, barristers and solicitors, litigation lawyer, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe, to have me served with a cease and desist demand letter accusing me of a variety of crimes, or at least civil tors, but you know, the definite criminal act that the UUA accused me of via this letter was the crime of blasphemous libel. And you know, as I mentioned, they did so on the basis that my allegedly unfounded and vicious blog posts about Unitarian Universalist ministers engaging in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape were defamatory, and so defamatory that they amounted to the crime of blasphemous libel, that is, blaspheming against Unitarian Universalism. So, big problem there with the terminology that was used is that word unfounded. Because in fact, the cases that I had in fact blogged about were cases where Unitarian Universalists had actually been convicted of engaging in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. And in fact, the Unitarian Universalist, who I described as a pedophile rapist because he had been convicted of raping preteen girls, including a neighbor's daughter and a female family member, who would appear to most likely be a granddaughter or possibly a grandniece. She wasn't actually identified, but the age difference is such that this girl, preteen girl, female family member who was raped by one Richard Buell, was almost certainly his granddaughter, or as I said, a grandniece, something of that nature. So he was convicted, and the interesting thing is he, to the best of my knowledge, isn't even a Unitarian Universalist minister, so I wasn't even talking about clergy abuse per se. I was talking about a Unitarian Universalist layperson who'd been convicted of the despicable crimes of both pedophilia and rape combined. So, I am protesting the fact that the Unitarian Universalist Association is falsely accusing me of the crime of blasphemous libel in what can be properly described as Lance Armstrong-style legal bullying that seeks to cover up and hide the fact that a certain number of Unitarian Universalists, indeed Unitarian Universalist clergy, are actually guilty of engaging in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. As I said, the one person who I described as a pedophile rapist was not a Unitarian Universalist minister, and prior to receiving that cease and desist demand letter, I had not actually blogged about a Unitarian Universalist minister who'd engaged in the despicable crime known as pedophilia. The fact of the matter is, however, that I could have. Even prior to receiving that cease and desist demand letter, I was aware of cases of pedophilia engaged in by Unitarian Universalist ministers. I just hadn't blogged about them yet, and I still haven't. I made a New Year's resolution to the effect that I would this year, and this year is getting close to being over, so I guess I better get with it. But the fact of the matter is, most ironically, prior to being accused of the crime of blasphemous libel for allegedly making unfounded and vicious allegations about Unitarian Universalist ministers engaging in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape, I had not actually accused any Unitarian Universalist minister of the despicable crime known as pedophilia, even though I could have. So just incredible incompetence on the part of UUA leaders, and unfortunately Stikeman Elliott barristers and solicitors litigation lawyer Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe, unless he knows something about Richard Buell that I don't know. I mean, it's possible that Richard Buell was a Unitarian Universalist minister, but I've seen no evidence of that. So I was certainly not aware of him being a Unitarian Universalist minister, and did not identify him as such in my blog post. I clearly said he was a lay person. So unless Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe and UUA leaders know that Richard Buell actually was a Unitarian Universalist minister, they're just total incompetence in, saying that I had made allegations about Unitarian Universalist ministers engaging in pedophilia. So yes, this is one of the many ways in which you use attempt to censor and suppress critics. They're not always successful. Sometimes they are. But in this case, so far, I haven't taken down so much as a comma from the blog posts in question. I don't even know which blog posts Stikeman Elliott was actually referring to. I mean, I assume that they were talking about the blog posts in which I spoke about Reverend Mac Mitchell and Richard Buell, which are by no means making unfounded and vicious allegations. I actually asked Stikeman Elliott's attorney, Maitre Coulombe, to clearly identify those blog posts which he was alleging contained unfounded and vicious allegations to the effect that ministers of the association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape, and he refused. I told him I couldn't find any such blog posts matching that description, and that was the truth. I knew where I had spoken about Reverend Mac Mitchell's rape of teenage Tibetan refugees. I knew where I had blogged about Richard Buell being convicted of the rape of preteen girls. Good afternoon, John. So, looks like your attempts to shut down this protest haven't gone too well, have they? Might have been better to negotiate a settlement. Oh, John Hinder didn't look too happy. That's the current president of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, who is very, very responsible for the fact that this protest is taking place. If we go back to when Reverend Ray Drennan falsely and maliciously labeled Creation Day as a cult, and labeled me psychotic because I'm claiming a quite profound religious experience, basically, if we go back to the early stages of this, you know, the mid to late 90s, early 2000s, John Inder was, you know, involved with the board of the church, and he eventually became vice president and then eventually became president. And in his capacity as vice president of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, he was directly responsible for having me kicked out of the Unitarian Church for 6 months for doing nothing more than informing the board that Reverend Ray Drennan had delivered an unacceptable non-apology apology, and suggesting that they might be well advised to persuade him to write and deliver a better apology that actually acknowledged wrongdoing on his part and actually retracted his offending statements and had at least the appearance of sincerity. But instead of doing that, they chose to kick me out of the church for 6 months, and that was John Inder, who was personally responsible for that in his capacity as vice president of the church, and thus also chairperson of the so-called Disruptive Behavior Committee. This is another way in which Unitarians tried to silence me. They characterized my calm and peaceful distribution of letters of grievance to church members after church services were over as disruptive behavior. I can't think of a less disruptive way of sharing my concerns with congregants than quietly and peacefully and calmly handing out letters of grievance that were reasonably worded letters. You know, they weren't letters that contained threats or anything like that. There was nothing disruptive about them. So the Mr. Inder there, I should mention, by the way, that he was also instrumental in the later permanent expulsion from the Unitarian Church of Montreal, and he was also at least indirectly involved with the criminal charges that the Unitarian Church of Montreal brought against me in late 2000. I was arrested in early December 2000 for allegedly disrupting the order and solemnity of church services at the Unitarian Church of Montreal. And although John Inder was not a prosecution witness, he seemed to have some involvement in that. And he certainly sought to rub it in my face. When the case was finally to go to trial for the first time in February, if I'm not mistaken, of I think 2002, if I remember correctly, the first actual trial date was scheduled for sometime in February of 2002, and just a few days before, the Sunday before the trial was supposed to start, John Inder came up to me and started basically saying, "Oh, you're not going to be here much longer," kind of thing. Basically, sort of rubbing it in my face that my protest was soon to end. Well, guess what? Here we are. How many years later? And it's still on. Nonetheless, in doing that, in his sort of little power trip there, John Inder called Creation Day a cult to my face. I was holding a picket sign that said "cult" is a 4-letter word, and that, of course, was referencing the fact that Reverend Ray Drennan and Frank Green had falsely and maliciously slandered Creation Day as a cult. So John, basically asked about the sign. I mean, he knew perfectly well what it was about, but he asked about it again. And so I reminded him, what it was all about, and basically how Ray Drennan and Frank Green had falsely and maliciously labeled Creation Day as a cult, and then John said, "Oh, it is a cult," to my face, days before I was scheduled to go to trial for allegedly disrupting the order and solemnity of church services. So John just added himself to the list of Montreal Unitarians who had slandered Creation Day as a cult in doing that. And as I said, he was quite arrogantly gloating, that's the word I'm looking for, gloating, about the fact that I was going to go to trial, and in his mind I would be convicted of disrupting the order and solemnity of church services, and that would put a permanent end to my protest, if not send me to jail for a little bit of time. And that did not happen, not at all, because first of all, I received a letter from the court saying that one of the prosecution witnesses had a hospital appointment or something, and had some kind of operation, and was thus unable to testify, and therefore the trial had to be postponed. So instead of going to trial in February of 2002, the trial was postponed until November 1st of 2002. And of course we're talking the first day of the trial, not the whole trial. We're talking the first day, the first actual day where we're actually basically having the prosecutor present his case against me, and then I'm hopefully getting around to cross-examining witnesses. So in the end, the trial was by no means completed on November 1st, and we had to set another court date. And I can't remember exactly when that court date was, but the point being is more than a decade after John Inder was